The year was 1873, and the wind over Bitter Creek had the sting of iron. It pulled through the dry winter grass like a blade rattling fence wire and sweeping dust against the warped boards of the abandoned post office. The town, if it could still be called that, had once been called Cora. The sign lay half buried now, its name fading, as if the prairie itself had given up saying it. A wagon sat stuck in the mud beyond the creek's bend. The wheels were sunken deep, one cracked outright, and the mule lay on its side with its eyes gone dull. There were crows already gathering on the ridge. One circled lower. She was alone beside it, standing in boots patched more times than they were whole. Her shawl was wet and useless, stiff with sleet, and her face had the set look of someone who'd stopped asking God for things. Her name was Lona. No one had spoken it in weeks. Behind her in the wagon, 3 children. Her children lay wrapped in burlap and silence. The smallest made a sound like a cough, but didn't wake. Lona didn't turn. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her hands were raw, split across the knuckles, the way they'd been since crossing the divide. She'd once had a husband. His name didn't matter now. He'd taken the last of their coin and gone into Medicine Bow to find work. That was 20 days back, maybe more. He had not returned. She had not cried. Her belly growled, and she ignored it. Hunger was a sound she'd gotten used to. But the silence, the hard silence of her children, not crying, not speaking, not even whimpering anymore, that was different. That was a kind of sound that settled into the bones. Hooves sounded behind her, slow and deliberate, not hurried. She did not turn to look. "You ought to move on," a man's voice said. She blinked against the wind, not moving. "You'll freeze here." He paused. "I can't help." Still she did not speak. The man exhaled the sound of leather creaking as he shifted in his saddle. Then from where he sat he saw a child's hand, small, thin as twigs, outstretched from the wagon, the skin gray around the nails. He dismounted. Lona turned then just a little, her chin lifting. She didn't ask for anything. Not water. Not food. Not help. Her eyes, swollen and cracked at the corners, met his. It was like looking into the mouth of a cave, dark, endless, and echoing with things a man didn't want to name. The stranger said nothing for a moment. Then he pulled off his gloves and stepped toward the wagon. "I got a fire a mile north," he said. "You bring them, I'll find something hot." Lona didn't answer. Her legs wouldn't move. She felt the weakness behind her knees, and the cold in her feet had become pain again. For a while it had only been numbness. Now it burned like needles. Her mouth opened and closed once. The man bent without a word and lifted the eldest child, who was barely more than 6. The girl didn't cry, didn't flinch, just curled against his chest with the quiet resignation of someone who had learned the world would not come to her. He looked at Lona again. "Can you walk?" She nodded once. "You carry 1, I'll carry 2. She moved then. It hurt more to stand than she thought it would, like her limbs had forgotten they were hers. She climbed the wagon, lifting the next smallest child against her shoulder. The little boy made a small sound, maybe a breath, maybe nothing. The man didn't ask names. He didn't offer his. He just walked steady and careful through the mud toward a trail hidden between the junipers. The mule lay dead behind them. The wind followed. The trail was narrow, half gone with snow and thorn bush. His horse followed behind, reins loose. Lona's arms ached with the weight of her son, but she kept her eyes forward, watching the stranger's boots leave prints in the crusted dirt. He didn't look back, didn't speak. They walked for what might have been a mile, maybe more, time stretching in that strange cold way it does when everything hurts and the world has gone quiet. The child in her arms stirred once, fingers curling into the fold of her shawl. She pressed her cheek to his hair and kept moving. Ahead, smoke laced the air. The man's camp sat beneath a stand of cottonwoods, their leaves long gone, but their trunks offering some windbreak. There was a fire half-built flickering low under a lean of dry rock. Nearby, a tarp stretched between two branches sheltered a saddle bedroll and pack. There was no tent. He laid the children down beside the fire one by one, his hands careful as a doctor's, though his face was marked with grime and his coat had a rifleman's cut. He took a stick and fed the flames until they licked higher. "Get close," he said. Lona knelt clutching her boy. The heat felt too hot at first, biting against her skin. She turned the child toward it, rubbing his back in slow circles. The man stepped back, rummaged through his things. From a rusted tin, he poured dried beans and hard biscuit into a blackened pot, then water from his canteen. Set it on the fire. Sat cross-legged beside it, quiet as before. The smell of it hit her hard. Not good, not bad, just real. Her stomach twisted like it didn't know whether to beg or run. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally. She hesitated. "Cheyenne." He nodded like that made sense. "Long way off. Wagon's done." "I know." He didn't press her. Didn't ask where her husband was. Didn't ask what she planned to do next. The silence between them stretched again, but it didn't bite like before. The fire cracked. Somewhere above, a hawk called once, then was gone. He looked at the children. "They got names?" She hesitated. "Hazel. That's the girl. Thomas and Eli." He gave a small grunt. "Strong names. They're strong kids." "You too," he said, not looking at her. Lona didn't answer. Her hands moved over Eli's back, checking his spine for fever, his breath for strength. He was thin. Too thin. "You sick?" the man asked. "No," she said, though it was mostly true. He nodded again, as if that was enough. The pot bubbled low. He stirred it with a spoon whittled down to half its size, then passed her a dented tin cup filled with the stew. She took it. The first bite hurt her jaw sore from disuse, her throat dry. But she ate. Slowly. Carefully. She fed Eli first, then Hazel. Then Thomas, whose eyes fluttered open for a breath and then closed again. "You come from the East?" he asked. "Virginia." He raised his eyebrows. "Long road. I was born there. We left after the war." That was all she said, and it was all he needed. He didn't ask which side. Didn't ask who she lost. "You got a name?" she asked finally. "Call me Finch." She nodded. It was a name. That was enough. The stew was gone before she realized it, scraped clean. Finch stood, poured another cup, handed it over. His hands were nicked, old scars and fresh ones too. Not a stranger to knives or rope. "You can stay the night," he said. "Fire's warm. Kids'll need it." She looked at him for a long time, trying to read what kind of man he was, if he was the kind that made you pay for kindness. But there was nothing sharp in his eyes, just tiredness. "Thank you," she said. Finch nodded, already sitting again, watching the fire like it might tell him something he'd missed. And for the first time in days, the wind didn't feel like it wanted to kill her. Subscribe and don't let the silence win. By morning, the snow had softened into a fine white crust over the world, and Lona woke with her back against a tree, and her children draped around her like roots. She didn't remember falling asleep. Finch had stayed up, or at least she never saw him sleep. He was feeding the fire when she opened her eyes, the light of it catching on his cheekbones, his breath rising in little clouds. Hazel stirred and sat up slowly, blinking at the sky like she didn't believe it. Thomas coughed once, then laid his head back down. Eli, still pressed to Lona's side, didn't move. Finch handed her a strip of jerky. She tore it in half without thinking and gave the larger piece to Hazel. He nodded toward the wagon trail. "You'll need another mule. Maybe a whole rig. Town's west. Day's ride." Lona didn't speak. She didn't have coin. She barely had enough strength to stand. The silence hung between them. He scratched at his beard, watching the fire. "I got work. South pasture up in Wind Hollow. Fence posts need replacing. Could use help." She looked at him, slow and unsure. "You offering me a job?" He shrugged. "You want it? Work for feed. Stay in the barn, maybe later the house." She studied him. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Tossed a twig into the fire and watched it catch. "Man shouldn't let a kid starve," he said. That was all. She didn't trust it, not fully, but she didn't have the strength to argue. "I've worked," she said. "I can fix a harness. Milk. Split kindling." He gave a single nod, like that was enough of a contract between them. Then he stood, stretched his back, and whistled low. His horse came slow and obedient. He lifted Hazel first, then Thomas, who winced in the light. Eli still weak, he carried himself, wrapping him in his own coat. Lona climbed up behind them, stiff and cold but moving. The trail west was long, but not cruel. They passed under bare cottonwoods and through shadowed gulches where the frost hadn't yet melted and the wind moaned low like a warning. Lona held her children tight against her, afraid of the next bend in the path of what might be waiting just beyond sight. But Finch rode steady without speaking, and his presence felt like something solid in a world made of ash and air. By midday they reached the hollow. It was not a large place. A barn weather-beaten but strong. A small house gray with age but not neglect. A field stretched beyond it, rough and brown with the end of winter. The fences stood in pieces, leaning split, broken in spots. Finch helped the children down and pointed toward the barn. "Warm hay in the loft. Keep dry in the wind." She nodded, wordless, and carried Eli inside. Finch followed with the others. He laid down feed bags as bedding, handed Lona a wool blanket from a chest by the wall. "You'll stay here," he said. "At least till the boy can walk." She sat down on the hay, not yet sure if her legs would work if she stood again. Finch leaned against the barn wall, arms folded. "I'll bring supper. Got potatoes and salt pork?" She looked up. Her lips cracked as she spoke. "Thank you." Finch's face didn't change. He just nodded once, then turned and stepped out into the wind. The children slept. Lona sat in silence for a long time, her hands folded in her lap. Outside she could hear Finch chopping wood, steady, rhythmic, patient. She didn't know what kind of man he was. She didn't know why he'd offered help. But in that moment, sitting in the warm hay with the snow melting off her boots, she didn't feel quite as hollow as she had before. And that was something. Days passed, quiet as dusk. The snow pulled back from the grass in patches, revealing mud and brittle earth. Finch worked sun-up to sundown, and Lona, though her bones ached and her hands stung with cold, rose each morning to work beside him. She started with small things, mending a saddle strap, splitting kindling, sweeping the barn. Then, when her strength returned, she took to the fence line with him, hauling posts on her back like a mule. She never asked for rest. He never offered. Finch didn't talk much, but he noticed things. When she wrapped Hazel's feet in cloth to keep them warm, he found a pair of old boots and left them by the barn door. When Ellie started coughing in his sleep, Finch boiled wild mint and bark in a dented tin, said nothing as he handed it over. She watched him through the smoke of evening cook fires, the way he moved like a man who'd forgotten how to sit still. His face was lean, his eyes shaded. Something had gone wrong in him once she could tell, not from what he said, but from the way he flinched when the children laughed too loud or when thunder rolled low across the hills. One morning, with frost still on the ground, she found him in the shed behind the barn, staring at a photograph nailed to the wall. A woman with pale hair and narrow eyes. A boy beside her. The photo was cracked down the middle. Lona stood at the doorway, silent. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. But that afternoon, when Hazel fell and scraped her knee, Finch was the first to kneel beside her, tying a clean bandage with careful hands. His voice was low, almost gentle. "World's not out to hurt you," he said to the girl. "It just don't care. You get up anyway." That night Lona made biscuits out of flour and lard he'd stored in the cellar. Burned the first batch, got the second right. She brought them out to the porch where he sat whittling a stick down to nothing. He took one without a word, bit into it, chewed slow. "Then they're good." She almost smiled. "Thanks." The moon rose over Wind Hollow, cold and pale. The children were asleep in the barn. The sky was full of stars, but didn't seem to care whether anyone noticed. She sat down on the top step beside him, pulling her shawl close. "I didn't think anyone stopped," she said, after a long time. He didn't look at her. Almost didn't. "What change?" He tossed the whittled stick into the dark. "Her hands," he said. "Couldn't forget the way they looked. Too small to be that cold." They didn't speak for a while after that. The wind moved through the grass like something breathing. Far off a coyote yipped once, then was gone. She looked at him, his profile rough in the moonlight. "You ever lose someone?" He didn't move. "Wife, son, long time ago." "What happened?" He shook his head. "Same thing that happens to most. Got sick. Town doctor said it was nothing. Turned out it was something." Lona didn't say sorry. She figured he'd heard it too many times. Instead, she said, "I was 17 when I married. Didn't know much about anything. Thought I did." "Everyone does," he said. She looked at the horizon. He was sweet at first. Then he got mean. Finch didn't respond, but she felt something shift in the air, like his silence wasn't disinterest, it was understanding. She stood. "I'll be up early. Still posts to finish." He nodded. "Barn door needs fixing too." "I saw it." She turned, started down the steps. "Lana," he said behind her. She looked back. "You and the kids, you got a place here?" "Long as you want." Something caught in her throat, sudden and sharp. "Thank you," she said. She didn't cry. Not then, but that night after she wrapped Ellie in her arms and listened to his breathing even out, she let herself press her forehead against the wood of the stall and close her eyes. Not safe. Not yet. But maybe getting there. The thaw came early. By late March, the creek behind the pasture swelled and pulled at its banks, carrying dead branches and old leaves like secrets it didn't want anymore. The earth turned soft and messy, but Lona didn't mind. Mud meant growth, meant warmth was coming. Each morning she was out before the sun chopping wood, feeding the hens. Finch had half forgotten setting bread to rise near the stove. The children were stronger now and louder. Hazel ran barefoot most days chasing crows. Thomas carried a stick like it was a rifle guarding the barn. Eli clung to her still, but his cheeks were rounder and he laughed sometimes in his sleep. Finch watched all this from a distance mostly. He'd nod now and then when Hazel waved, show Thomas how to tighten a cinch strap or sharpen a blade. But he stayed quiet, like too many words might break whatever they were building. Lona understood that kind of silence. She'd lived it. Some nights after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, they'd sit on the porch with mugs of chicory coffee. The air carried the smell of wet cedar and melting snow. He told her about the boy. His name was Caleb. Died of fever in the winter of '68. His wife Helen followed 3 weeks later. Stopped eating, Finch said. Didn't blame her. She told him about the nights she'd slept sitting up, hand on a knife, back when her husband would come home drunk and loud. Told him how she'd left once before, walked 16 miles with Hazel on her hip, but gone back when he caught up to her. Finch didn't judge, just listened. Then one evening after Thomas asked if Finch was like a grandpa or just a man, they both laughed. Really laughed. Lona laughed until her ribs ached, and Finch shook his head, smiling to himself like it hurt a little to remember how. After that, things began to shift. He let Hazel braid the mane of his horse even though she tied it full of straw and wildflowers. He let Thomas sit beside him while he cleaned his rifle. He carved Eli a toy fox from pine, left it on his blanket without saying who made it. One day, Lona found a patch of crocuses pushing up by the back fence. She picked a few and put them in a chipped jar on the kitchen shelf. Finch saw them and said nothing, but he stopped just short of throwing away the broken china he'd meant to toss. There were moments, quiet and unexpected, that caught her off guard, like when she found him mending Hazel's doll with a needle so big it looked ridiculous in his hands, or when he brought back sugar from the trading post without being asked. But it wasn't all easy. There were hard days too. Like when a neighbor came riding up the trail asking questions about her, the children, where she'd come from. Finch stood between them, arms folded, voice low and unfriendly. "Don't ask what ain't yours to know," he said. The man rode off. Lona watched from the window, chest tight. "That night she said you didn't have to do that." Finch stared into the fire. "Yes, I did." She sat beside him on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. "You know I can't stay forever," she said, though it came out smaller than she meant it to. He nodded. "I know. I don't want to just take what's yours." He turned, then looking at her full on. "Ain't just mine anymore." She felt something shift. In the firelight his face looked worn but not tired, like a man still carrying weight but no longer alone in it. Outside the wind rose and settled. Inside the coals glowed orange and gold. Lona didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. And Finch didn't reach for her hand. But he didn't need to either. Spring brought color. Not the bright shouting kind, but the quiet return of green along the fence line, purple in the shadows, gold low in the grass where the sun touched. Lona planted onions and beets in a narrow strip behind the house. Finch built her a box for herbs, said nothing while she lined it with sage and mint and something she thought might be yarrow. The children took to sleeping in the house after a late frost scared them half to death in the barn. Finch gave up his room without asking, hauled his bedroll out to the porch and stayed there like it didn't matter. But Lona saw the way his shoulders hunched now when he moved. He was still young, maybe 40, but carried himself like someone who'd lived too many winters. One morning she caught him rubbing his back and offered liniment. He resisted, but not long. She worked it into his shoulders with slow, firm hands. Said nothing about the scar along his spine. He said nothing about the tremble in hers. They didn't talk about what they were. Not yet. But something had rooted itself between them, solid and quiet as fence posts sunk deep into dry ground. Then came the letter. Finch brought it back from town in the pocket of his coat. She was mending Thomas's pants on the porch when he walked up the steps, handed it over without meeting her eyes. Lona turned it over, recognized the scrawl. Her hand went cold. "It's from him," she said flatly. Finch didn't ask who. She opened it. Read it once. Then again, slower. When she was done, she folded it and set it on the porch rail like it burned. "He's in Cheyenne," she said. "Says he found work. Wants us to come. Says he's sorry." Finch didn't move. She stood too fast. "He left us to die. Took the horse, took the money. I begged him not to go." Still Finch said nothing. She looked at him, throat tight. "He's their father." He raised his head at that. "So was I," he said. "For 5 years. Never stopped being." She stared at him. "You think I should go?" Finch shook his head. "I think you already know what you're gonna do." That night she didn't sleep. Just watched the ceiling and listened to her children breathe. Hazel curled in a ball. Eli had kicked off his blanket. Thomas snored a little through his nose. In the morning she packed a small bag. Finch saw it but didn't speak. Just handed her a wrapped parcel of bread and jerky. "I'm not going to stay with him," she said. "Just going to tell him to his face. He doesn't get to say sorry in a letter." He nodded once. "Take the horse. She knows the road." Lona reached for the reins, then stopped. "If I don't come back, you will." She mounted and rode out before the sun broke. Didn't look back. It was 3 days to Cheyenne. She found him in a boarding house off the main road working for a freighter company. His face was thinner. His eyes held that same oily charm she used to mistake for love. He cried when he saw her, called her beautiful, asked about the kids, swore he was ready this time, changed. Lona listened. Then she stood and said no. Said it plain. No shaking, no yelling, just a word. He followed her out, tried to grab her arm. She pulled away. "You lost us," she said. "Not because you left, because you didn't come back." She rode hard that night, slept little. Thought of Finch's hands in the earth, the sound of Hazel's laughter, the way the barn smelled like warm hay and oil. She thought of home. When she rode back into the hollow, dust-covered and hoarse, he was on the porch sharpening a blade. He didn't smile, didn't rush to her, but he stood. She climbed down stiff and slow. "I told him." Finch nodded. "Good. I came back." "I know." She stepped onto the porch close enough to feel his warmth. "I don't want to be taken care of. I know that too. I just want to belong somewhere." "You do." He reached out then. Not fast, not greedy, just open. She stepped into his arms, and the wind passed over the hollow, gentle now. The days turned steady. Finch moved the last of the broken fence posts and planted new ones with Thomas beside him, teaching the boy how to dig straight and true. Hazel spent afternoons trailing Lona in the garden, asking 1,000 questions about roots and worms and weather. Eli learned to walk across the porch without falling, his steps wobbly and wide, always ending at Finch's boot, where he'd steady himself and grin like he'd conquered the world. It wasn't a loud life, but it was full. Each morning, Lona woke with the smell of coffee and smoke. Each night she checked the doors, banked the fire, and kissed her children one by one. Sometimes Finch would sit beside her afterward, his arm brushing hers, neither of them needing to say much. She learned things about him not in the telling, but in the noticing. He kept a small box of keepsakes in the bottom of the kitchen cabinet. Inside, a silver button, a river stone, the first drawing Caleb had ever made. When Ellie found it one day and tried to eat the stone, Finch didn't yell. He just picked him up, held him close, and sat quiet for a long time. Lona began sewing again. Nothing fine, just mending and simple clothes for the boys. Finch cut new shelves for the kitchen and added a lock to the barn where the feed was kept. Their lives grew around each other like roots, slowly, quietly, until one day she realized she couldn't remember what it had felt like to be cold every morning, hungry every night. Then came the notice. It arrived on a Sunday in late April, brought by a man in a suit with dust on his shoes. He didn't come to the house, just left the letter with the clerk in town. Finch picked it up on a supply run and brought it home with salt coffee and nails. He handed it to her on the porch. Lona read it once, then again. Her husband, her former husband, had filed a petition, claiming custody, claiming abandonment, claiming rights. She said nothing for a long time. Finch leaned against the doorframe. "What's it mean?" She folded the paper in slow, deliberate creases. "Means I might have to stand in front of a judge. Means he's not done trying to take what he never earned." Finch didn't flinch. "Then we fight." She looked at him, eyes hollowed out by old fear. "What if I lose?" "We don't lose," he said. "Not this." They talked to the preacher in town who knew a lawyer in Laramie, a friend who'd seen enough bad men try to rewrite the past. Lona wrote out everything, dates, names, bruises she hadn't spoken of in years. Finch sat beside her while she wrote, didn't offer words, just stayed. The hearing was set for June. In the weeks that followed, the house got quieter again. Not from fear, but from preparation. Finch taught Lona how to shoot. She'd held a rifle before, but never like this. Not like someone with something worth protecting. They built a box for papers, organized everything they had. Every scrap that proved where she'd been, and more importantly, where the children were now. Hazel sensed it. Asked one night, is he coming here? Lona held her close. No, but we'll be ready if he does. The day before the hearing, Lona stood on the porch looking at the hollow. Everything was green now. Wildflowers, bees, the air full of heat. Finch came up behind her. I don't need a ring, she said, voice low. Or a name. He said nothing. I just need to walk into that room and know I'm not walking in alone. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of leather braided and worn with a small silver button strung through it. He wrapped it around her wrist. You won't be? The next morning they rode out together. The children stayed with the preacher's wife. Finch wore a clean shirt. Lona wore her shawl, and the mountains stood behind them like old, steady witnesses. Whatever came next, they would not go backward. Not again. The courtroom was plain. Dry air, wooden benches, a cracked window that let in the sound of wagons and boots from the street below. Lona sat with her hands folded in her lap, the button bracelet hidden under her sleeve. Finch was beside her, silent as always, but his presence weighed more than words. Her husband sat across the room, shoulders back, like a man who believed he still had power. He wore a coat too fine for a freighter. His hair was oiled. His lies were ready. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, glanced at the papers before him. This is a custody petition, he said, voice flat. 3 children. No formal separation. Both parties claiming rights. Lona's stomach coiled, but she didn't flinch. The lawyer from Laramie stood up. He was calm. He spoke in facts. Laid out the days Finch found her near dead by the wagon. The mule, the cracked axle, the missing food. The long walk to Wind Hollow. The healing. Then he called her. She rose, moved steady, took the stand. Her voice didn't tremble. I raised those children, she said. Fed them, clothed them, walked them across half the territory when he left us. He took the last coin and the horse, said he'd find work. He found silence instead. Her husband smiled, smug and false. I sent a letter. 28 days too late, she said. The judge nodded. Where were the children living before the letter? With me. On Mr. Finch's land. But he didn't take us in. We earned our place. Finch met her eyes. His hands were folded but tight. Her husband rose to speak. Claimed fear. Said he left to build a foundation, not abandon. Said she was unstable. Said a man had no chance to come back if a woman decided for him. The judge looked at Lona. Do you have proof of harm? She hesitated. Then she pulled back her sleeve, showed the faded bruise that never quite left the bone, pointed to the scar on Hazel's leg, quietly listed the times she'd run, the nights the children didn't sleep. Proofs, not always ink and paper, she said. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's what you don't come back to. The judge asked Finch to speak. He stood, cleared his throat once. I ain't their blood, he said, but I've never seen anyone fight harder for a family than her. She didn't ask for help. She earned everything under my roof. Her kids don't flinch when I raise my hand. That's proof enough. The judge sat back, looked over the papers again. Then he said the words, custody remains with the mother. Petition denied. Her husband swore, stood. She took them from me. No, the judge said. You gave them away." Lona didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of him. She turned, walked out, Finch behind her. The sun hit her face like a promise. Back in the wagon, she sat still a long time. Finch gave her space. Didn't speak. Then she turned. "He doesn't get to have them. Or me." Finch nodded. "He never did." They rode back in silence, the road long but familiar now. The hollow appeared like something remembered. The barn, the smoke, the children running from the porch the moment they saw her. Ellie reached her first arms up. Hazel asked if she'd won. Thomas held out a wooden knife he'd made while she was gone. She knelt in the dust, pulled them close. That night she and Finch sat on the porch. The stars above were clear and wide. No noise. No fear. She reached for his hand. Held it. Didn't let go. Summer came slow and full, like the land itself was exhaling. The grass reached higher along the fence line, the hens laid regular, and Lona's garden pushed up green things faster than she could name them. Evenings were warm, the kind that made you linger outside just to listen to the quiet. Hazel learned how to braid rope. Thomas took to fishing in the creek with a line and a bent nail. Eli toddled after them, always one step behind, always laughing when he fell. Finch built a swing from an old wagon wheel and a rope thick as a man's wrist. Hung it from the cottonwood near the barn. The children wore a rut in the dirt beneath it. Lona woke early every day, even when she didn't have to. There was always something to do, wash, to hang bread, to bake, hands to guide, but she didn't feel stretched thin like she used to. Her work felt like it belonged to something solid, something worth keeping. Finch was slower now to turn away. He smiled easier. The lines around his eyes softened when Hazel climbed onto his shoulders or when Lona caught his hand by the well. He still never said much, but his quiet had changed. It wasn't hiding anymore. It was peace. One night after the children were asleep and the coals in the stove glowed low, Lona stood by the window brushing her hair. Finch was outside closing up the barn. She watched him move, shoulders steady, boots slow in the dust. A man made of work and silence. When he came in, she didn't speak, just walked up to him and placed her hand against his chest, feeling the warmth there, the steady rhythm. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just because of the children, not just because it's safe, but because I choose this." He didn't ask her to explain. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his work shirt and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a silver ring, simple, a little tarnished, carved with a wheat stalk across the top. "Was my mother's," he said. "I never kept much, but I kept this." She stared at it, the weight of everything between them settling into her chest. "I'm not what you had before," she said. He shook his head. "You're what I never thought I'd get again." He didn't kneel. She didn't cry. They stood there, two people rebuilt by time and hard ground, and when he slipped the ring onto her finger, her hand didn't shake. They married the next week in the hollow under the cottonwoods. Preacher came out from town, children barefoot in clean clothes, Finch in the same coat he'd worn to court. Lona wore her mother's shawl and flowers in her hair. They didn't speak vows, just held hands while the wind moved around them, and the preacher said, "Let it be known." And that was enough. Afterward they ate bread and roast chicken in the yard. The children danced to no music at all. Hazel made a crown from wildflowers and placed it on Finch's head, which he wore without complaint. That night, long after the sun had gone, Lana sat on the porch steps watching fireflies flicker low across the field. Finch sat behind her, legs on either side, his arms around her waist. "You ever think about the road?" he asked quietly. "All the time," she said, "but I don't want to be on it anymore." He nodded, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Me neither." She looked down at the ring, the silver catching moonlight. A symbol, a start, not of rescue but of return. Home, not because they escaped something, but because they built it. and behind them inside the quiet house their children slept safe, their dreams soft. The wind moved through the grass like a lullaby. Subscribe and keep your boots on this road.